Right. So thank you, Rhys, for the introduction. Right. Today we'll be talking about how you can make your app China ready, which means it's ready to be deployed and used within mainland China. A little bit about myself, as Rhys already introduced. My name is Ali, and I co-founded Great Firewall Connect. And the idea behind this consultancy is that we help foreign companies that want to come to China. We help them deploy their software in China, and at the same time, we also help Chinese companies, Chinese digital companies that want to internationalize. We help them deploy their software to AWS or cloud for the rest of the world. Um, so little bit about the agenda, right? We'll start off with a little bit of historical context without getting too much boring. And then we'll talk about the UI UX, how China evolved differently in that aspects. We'll talk about the technical challenges. Yep, and the biggest technical challenge is the Great Firewall that's there in China. And then we'll come to the solution part, how we can localize our apps to make sure that they work in China. A little bit about compliance and license, and finally, developers' best practices to end the session. And if you have any questions, just feel free to jump in or ask. And also in Zoom, right? If you have any questions, just feel free to raise your hand and yeah.
Did you make it full screen?
Is it? Ooh,
Just make Zoom full screen. Can you do that?
yeah, sure.
Oh, is that mine?
Yes, this one. All right. Cool. All right, so we will start off with a little exercise, right? It is pretty small, but let's see if this works out. So these are like two biggest e-commerce websites. One is from China, Taobao, and one is from the US, Amazon, right? So I just want to start off with a small exercise to see if you can spot the differences, right? Like what's the difference in the interface that you see between these two screenshots?
The amount of stuff.
Yeah.
Usually, like there's a lot of information.
Right. So on the left-hand side, Taobao, it's very cluttered or very dense, right? And Amazon, it has more minimalistic look, right? So you can see everything is kind of like styled nicely and it has a lot of space in between, right? Any other things that comes to mind?
Just I don't like both.
Sorry?
I don't like both of them.
You don't like both of them, right? So that's a similarity, right?
There's a menu on the right
Mhm.
there in Taobao,
Right.
where they only have the top menu in Amazon.
Right, exactly, right? So again, same principle, right? So a lot of stuff there. You have the top bar and then the second top bar and then the search bar and those kind of stuff. Amazon, you get a bit more clean look, right? And another thing you can see is like the flashy colors, right? So Amazon, it has a bit of black and just yellow look, right? But over here, you can see that you have a lot of colors there as well. And usually, like a lot of bright colors there as well, right? Let's move on to a bit more interesting part, right? So now you see the screen capture of both of these websites, but on a mobile platform, right? So what's the difference you see now between using Taobao versus using Amazon as a consumer? Or so if you're using this on a mobile platform, what differences would you notice between these two?
Others Chinese only.
Chinese only, right? Right.
Again, much more
Yeah.
information.
Yes, exactly, right? Now, I think it again, right? So it's more dense, right? It has much more information compared to Amazon, right? But on mobile screen, right, you actually see that Amazon, I cannot actually do a lot of things. On desktop, right, you had a lot of tiles and this and that, right? It worked out. But over here, on the mobile screen, because the screen is smaller, right? You can actually feel like, all right, maybe if there is more information or there is more dense information, then I can actually see more things as well, right? So that's like the main difference between Chinese apps as well as the apps from the US or Europe or rest of the world, right? And I want to dive a bit into historical context of how that divide actually happened, right? And the divide is there between China and rest of the world, right? But not within the rest of the world a lot. There isn't a lot of divide between rest of the world, right? And the reason is, if you can see this blue line, right? This represents China, and this represents most of the Western countries from where the internet kind of like originated, right? So you have the US, UK, Canada, and so on and so forth. And on the bottom side, on the bottom scale, you can actually see the years, right? And you can see that the x-axis or the y-axis shows the percentage of internet users in the country. In Europe and the US, you can actually see that from late 1990s, there was a sharp increase in the number of internet users, right? You can see that there's a sharp incline over here, but on the China, you can actually see that the incline have been much later, almost a decade later, like in late 2008, 2009, right? And what this coincided with was the development of smartphones, right? So when the internet boomed here in the West, people were starting to use PCs more. So their first exposure to internet was using a PC or a laptop, right? And that's how internet actually evolved there as well. So it catered to the need of people using Internet Explorer, people using modem, people using laptops. Right? Whereas in China, right, when internet started to boom, it was already the age or the era where people were actually using smartphones or they were starting to use smartphones, right? And most of the people in mainland China, their first exposure was using phone, right? And that's where the main difference comes in. Whereas in the West, majority of people they experience internet for the first time using a laptop or a desktop, whereas in China the boom actually happened much later. So they kind of like skipped the desktop era and went head first into a mobile era, right? And this kind of like shaped how the apps, the user interface and user experience evolved in mainland China as well. Right. And I mean, this is not the only reason. The other reason is also that there was the Great Firewall, which kind of like protected Chinese internet from internet that was available for rest of the world, which means Chinese internet actually evolved a bit separately from rest of the world, right? And what happened because of this was they had a super app mentality over here. So users, they wanted everything in one place. They wanted one platform instead of going to different websites for different things. And that's where mini app system also evolved, right? And one of the major examples is WeChat, where you can chat, where you can order food as well, where you can pay as well, and you can literally do anything you want over there, right? The second point is that their user experience, right, is social first rather than using search engines. So for myself, and I think for majority of you as well, the first point of internet or the gateway to the internet is Google, right? So even if I wanted to do Facebook, right? If I want to go to Facebook, I would Google Facebook and then click on the first link that shows up, right? So for us, we use search engines more often, whereas in China, discovery usually happens through social media or through people themselves, right? So social media influencers, live streams, they're kind of like very big things. And so if you want to maybe promote your business in China, right? It's much better that you focus on social media and have a following there rather than focusing on SEOs and stuff. Right. They have a high trust in platforms and low trust in websites. It's kind of like opposite over here. We have high trust in websites. So for us, right, if I wanna, let's say, book a flight or book a hotel, right, I would rather you do it on my laptop rather than on mobile, right? However, in China, it's completely opposite, right? They would like to do things on the mobile phone, and it doesn't matter if it's personal thing or even business things, right? So even business, most of the business things, they would kind of like prefer if it's done on the on their mobile phone screens rather than using the desktop for that. Visual intensity, right? We kind of like look into this as well. Usually bold colors, right? They also have dense layout and a bit of animations here and there as well, which kind of like depicts the energy that they're kind of like after. So in China, um, there is this culture of doing things very fastly, right? And with bold color, dense layout, it kind of like helps them with the speed of doing things as well. So you kind of like see things more clearly and you can go and get things done much faster if you're kind of like used to that, right? And yeah, finally, speed and integration, right? They kind of like prefer doing things fast, getting things done quickly rather than the simplicity or the minimalism or the beauty of the designs. All right. Then let's move on to the technical bits, right? So technical challenges. What happens if you have a software that works here in Hong Kong, but you try and use it in China, right? So what are the issues or what are the challenges that you will normally face? The first one is regulatory walls. Basically, China has its own rules, just like Europe, just like EU, just like Hong Kong is gonna have as well. So, but these regulatory walls, they are often stricter and they are implemented very strictly as well. So you need to make sure that your app is fully compliant if you don't wanna get banned in China, basically. So you have to make sure that you are completely covered over there. Network latency, right? So we talked about Great Firewall, right? And if your app is hosted outside of the Great Firewall, if it's hosted even in Hong Kong or Singapore or the US, the network traffic has to go through the firewall, right? Which significantly slows it down. So if your app loads in 1 second in Hong Kong, it might take 5 to 10 seconds to load in the mainland China, right? So you have to kind of like wipe around the network latency that you have, APIs and dependencies. We know Google doesn't work in China, Facebook, YouTube, right? A lot of services don't work in China. So if your website uses or depends on one of these services, then most likely you'll have to make changes in order to make it work in China as well. App distribution, Google Play, as I mentioned, Google doesn't work in China, so Google Play is not there in China as well. And instead of that, they have multitudes of different app stores that work for Android phones, but for iOS, they have the Apple Store. But the problem is here again, right? So usually people in China, they don't use Google Play Store or App Store to figure out which game to download. They use the influence of social media to spread the word as well as get to know which apps are doing well or which games are doing well and then download them and use. And finally, observability or monitoring different SDKs and different services. They just like Google Analytics, they just don't work in China. So you'll have to kind of like adopt them or make sure that you use something that's compliant in China as well. Right. Any questions so far?
With the
Mhm.
SEO stuff.
Right.
So you said it doesn't like it's different.
Yeah.
So does that mean you wouldn't do SEO on your website or just maybe not focus as much on it?
I wouldn't focus if I wanna like have my business in China, right? So I would do it definitely for maybe Hong Kong or any other thing, right? But if I wanna just have more influence in China, then I wouldn't do it because very little part of traffic actually goes through the SEOs or goes through the search engine, right? Right. So you would have literally little to no difference in there.
If there's no SEO and most like of these apps get discovered through those mega apps like we
Right,
have,
right.
is the goal to then be on those mega apps or like to be integrated?
Yes.
Is that the best way?
I mean,
the best approach?
Again, that depends on your business case, right? So
Right.
if you are there only for a selected few customers, right? If you have only a selected few customers and you don't want to advertise to the mass, right?
Yeah.
Then you don't need to do that. You just make a few sales call and maybe get a few customers in there, right? But if you want to apply, if you have, let's say, a game, right? Or if you want to apply to the mass, right? Then it's better to have a strong or a very strong social media following, right? So you have an account that's kind of like very good or that has a lot of followers, or you kind of like pay these influencers to promote your app, right? And in China, right? So live streamers, they are pretty big. So for games, especially, right? So if you want to promote something there, then live streamers are basically the way to go. Right. Do we have any question on the Zoom or probably not?
I just want to add something.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm adding this because Ali and I
Yeah.
used to work together and we have a lot of experience in this. But one of the things that is also very different in China is a lot of people actually most of the people don't have any emails. So authentication really differs in both. So in China, authentication is not going to be like, people don't like to enter the name and password or then email or etc. They want to do it through QR codes. QR codes are from authenticated. WeChat ID, etc. become their more. So.
Right, exactly.
What about UX and UI? UX and UI. Can you talk about that for a little bit? You might have to share again.
Which social media is the biggest?
WeChat is basically it's not but Red Note is the social media that's biggest, but WeChat has the most users, right?
Which one is most commonly used for authentication?
WeChat, definitely, yes. So as Amshul mentioned, right, they don't actually have emails, and even for businesses, right, they normally don't have business emails, right? Especially if you look at like factories and those kind of like smaller places, right? And most people prefer to use their personal phone number just to log in, right? They don't even have like a business phone or a business WeChat to log in. And if it's not WeChat, then it has to be linked to the phone numbers, right? You send like a one-time code to a phone number and then you can log in. So that's cool.
I was asking about UI and UX, but I might let you go
Right.
at the end.
Yeah. So UI UX, right? It has. We'll discuss it later on as well. So we will start off with like the big point of what the common strategies are for localization. And there is this saying by one of my friends who said localization is not just text localization. So you don't translate stuff and expect everything to work in mainland China. You need to localize your infrastructure. You need to optimize the performance and make sure everything is compliant as well. So the common strategies for localization, first point is you need to translate everything into Chinese, right? And this point, it wasn't there until yesterday. I literally added it yesterday because I was in Beijing and we were part of the German delegate, right? We were trying to promote how to deploy your stuff in China, right? And one of the questions that got asked was, I don't have my app translated into Chinese, and do I need to do that? And the answer is definitely yes. Even if your target customers, they're like engineers and stuff who maybe know English, right? But the thing is, they are much used to using interfaces in Chinese, and for them, it's maybe 10 times faster if they use Chinese interface compared to let's say if they use English, right? So if you want to make sure that your app doesn't just work in China but is also user friendly, you need to translate it into Chinese, right? Second part is both locally, right? So we talked about the Great Firewall and how if it's hosted elsewhere, right, then the Great Firewall would basically increase the latency. So it would cause your app to be very slow. So if you want to host it locally, if you want to host within mainland China, that's ideal. But if you don't want to host it with locally, you can also go with a hybrid approach using CDN acceleration, right? What that means is you host your static assets, your HTML, your CSS, your fonts within mainland China and distribute it using a CDN that works there. And the backend, you can still host it in rest of the world. But mind you, this is still going to be very slow compared to if you host everything locally. Replace global services with local equivalents, right? That's very important as well. So as I mentioned, Google doesn't work in mainland China. So you find an equivalent of Google like Maps and make sure you replace everything that doesn't work in mainland China with an equivalent or a competitor that's there in mainland China. Adapt user experience for local expectations, right? And one of the points was definitely WeChat integration and WeChat login, right? So they don't use emails that often. So you have to kind of like make sure that the user experience it's as mobile friendly as possible for them, right? And it uses their local technology as much as possible because again they prefer using platforms within the mobile app, right? So they want to use super apps platform. And if you want them to have a completely separate app or a completely separate website that uses email login and so on and so forth, they wouldn't feel very comfortable or they wouldn't trust it as much. Right. Last two, optimize performance for mobile first users, right? So we want to make sure images are small and optimized and those kind of stuff. And also make sure that you test your app using network throttling, right? So make sure you throttle your network by turning the speed into half and then test, making sure everything still works or it doesn't break then. And finally, compliance and data laws in China. So you need to make sure that those are covered as well. And we'll talk about compliance later on as well.
How about because I know GitHub is blocked there. I don't know if
Right.
it still is.
Yeah.
What would you use for repository and
Right.
code?
So unless you are writing code inside mainland China, that should be okay with you, right? Like using CI/CD function of GitHub to just push stuff right to your local. But if you want to use something within mainland China, that is your coding, you have a team within mainland China, right? You can use GitLab as well and deploy it yourself, right?
That's good, right?
No.
That's
Yeah, it's open source.
Oh, I
So yeah. So you can deploy it within your own cloud environment. Yeah.
GitLab.
Yeah, GitLab.
Does Localizing work in?
I'm not sure.
I
But
don't
it
know.
worked for us, so I guess it's.
But I don't remember like. Yeah,
Hmm,
yeah.
Yeah,
I remember.
right.
James and I were at an event last week.
Hmm.
So last week, a week before something, they're run by a group called Radical.
Right.
And they have this local first Git repository
Mhm,
project
mhm.
or platform. And what it does, it you install it on your computer
Mhm.
and it pulls everyone's code into a local version on your machine. So
Right.
you don't, it's like a distributed network
Mhm.
that is like decentralized.
All right.
Yeah, so that might be another approach that you can do.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I guess, yeah, you can go that way as well, right? Decentralize everything. But I think at this point, it's not necessary for you to get into China, right? So it could be that you're kind of like overdoing stuff as well, right? Because it's already very complicated, right? You don't want to overcomplicate stuff as well, right?
Yeah, I guess this is just if
So-
you're working with the team.
Yeah, exactly right. So the thing or the most common question that we get is, all right, localization for China, it's too much work, right? I just want to get in there, maybe test and see if my app actually has a market, right? And then if it has a market or if it is like if there is a product market fit, then I would want to do all these localization changes, right? So how do I do that? And the easiest, not the easiest, but the most direct solution for that is that you use Direct Connect, right? Direct Connect is like a dedicated private network tunnel that provides you a private connection from mainland China to wherever your app is hosted, right? So this is not a proper solution. This is like a make-do thing, right? And I would never recommend you to go there if you have a lot of customers using this approach because it can get very expensive and it's not scalable at all, right? But if you want to just try things out in Chinese market, right? You want to see if your product actually has a consumer base, it has a market in China. You could use this. What it does, it basically creates a private tunnel for you and connects your services that are deployed abroad to a service that's there in China. And it's provided by major cloud providers, including Alibaba Cloud, Tencent Cloud, as well as AWS. AWS uses one of their partners in China to provide this. But what happens is you can have kind of like a proxy within mainland China that would proxy the request to your backend. But instead of using the internet, right, which goes to the firewall, it would go through the private network, right? That would kind of like bypass the firewall. And before you guys ask, yes, it is fully compliant and it is highly stable as well. So you get a stable internet connection to your backend without doing a lot of changes, to your code or to your software. Right. So that's like one of the shortcut ways of doing it. But in order to get it done, you need to get the license, which takes some time. And it is kind of like expensive and the bandwidth is usually limited, right? So you can't scale. So if you have hundreds of customers, maybe this should be okay. But if you want to have more customers or even IoT machines connected, right, then this becomes a big problem. And as I mentioned already, it's already very expensive. So if you want to buy more bandwidth, it becomes exponentially more expensive. And that's why for small projects or for POCs or for just trying out if your app works, this is like a really good and quick solution. But for actual software, this is not scalable as well. Right. As I mentioned, right, previously, in order to establish Direct Connect, you need to get the license. And that license, it's called the ICP license, right? Basically, ICP license, it's required for any server hosted in mainland China, right? And it could be a proxy or it could be an actual server, right? It's issued by the government called the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIIT. And there are two types of ICP licenses. First one is ICP filing, which is basically for non-commercial apps like information websites, portfolios. And the second one, it's more difficult to get as well. It's called the ICP commercial license. And if you're using a SaaS platform or anything that generates revenue, you need to get this one, right? And from last year onwards, mobile app filing is also required, which means if you have a mobile app, or even a WeChat mini program, right? You need to get a separate ICP filing for that. And ICP filings or ICP license, if you can see, you can usually see in Chinese websites, they mention this ICP number over here at the bottom, usually at the footer. And this basically ensures that the website or the web platform is actually compliant to the Chinese regulatory regime.
Do you normally have a separate site for China, dedicated to China, or
Yes.
how did Nike do it?
So you can have the same website as well, right? But there are some regulations, right, that you want to follow. And one of the thing is if you have the website that's kind of like hosted in China, right? So it should be the static part of the website should at least be in China, right? Which means it would either be slow for the Chinese user if it's hosted elsewhere, or it will be slow for rest of the world if it's hosted only in China, right? So that's why you need to host it both in China as well as rest of the world, right? And if you're hosting it in two different places, it's much better that you have two different addresses as well. Normally for Chinese websites, you have a .cn at the end. So, wait. Any other questions? Oh. Right. Then we will move on to MLPS, multi-level protection scheme. So another cybersecurity law, right? So previous one was for ICP license, which means you just apply for the license and you get the go ahead from the government that says, all right, you are good enough to do business in China, a digital business in China. This one, it's a bit more complicated, right? You need to make sure that you are compliant by the cybersecurity law, right? And then based on that, they provide different levels, right? They provide 1 to 4 based on the data sensitivity and the system impact. So how many users you have, for example, what kind of data you store, etc., right? For 90% of the users, level 2 would be good enough, right? So if you can get MLPS level 2 license, then you are good enough, right? And for this, they have, you have to apply for this like every year. So it's kind of like renewal things. You need to make sure that your infrastructure and everything is compliant every year. And you have some fee as well that you have to pay the government for this. But what happens is it mitigates the legal liability, right? So in case there is a data breach, in case things go south, right? Your company won't be as much liable if you have an MLPS certificate. And also another thing is the Chinese businesses, some of them require this, require you to have this certificate, right? Which means if you have this, Chinese businesses would trust you more, right? So they would be more willing to use your platform than maybe a local one. All right. Okay. Coming to the best practices and toolings that we can use if we want to make sure our software works in mainland China. Cloud native mindset, right? So make sure to use as many cloud native or cloud agnostic services as possible. Make sure that maybe if you can host them yourself, that's much better. But even if it's not hosted by yourself, even if you use managed services, make sure before starting to use them that they are also available in China. And just a side note, 90% of the managed services that are available here are not available in mainland China, or at least not available legally in mainland China, right? And that's another issue, right? So things might work in mainland China, but because they are hosted outside of the firewall, they can block it anytime they want, right? So if you have a customer base and suddenly your, let's say, authentication is blocked, then it's not a good thing to have, right? Um, Docker registry, right? One more thing, Docker doesn't work in mainland China. Again, it's unstable at best. So you might be able to pull an image or two here and there, right? But if you want to really have a CI/CD within mainland China, then you need to host your own Docker registry as well. An example could be Aliyun Container Registry, or you can also use one of the open source one to deploy your own on your own repository, right? CDN acceleration, right? So make sure all your static assets, they are deployed also in mainland China and they have CDN acceleration. There are a lot of companies that do that, Alibaba, Tencent Cloud, and so on. You can use any one of them to make sure that whenever someone tries to visit your website or your assets from within mainland China, it is deployed from CDN within mainland China. And one thing to notice over here is in order to use CDN acceleration within mainland China, you need to have an ICP license. So if you don't have a license, ICP license, then you won't be able to use this, which means your app will be super slow. Right. We talked about different cloud deployments, right? But you can also use hybrid cloud deployment, which means part of your infrastructure resides outside of mainland China and part of it is inside mainland China. And inside mainland China, again, you can do stuff like caching to make sure everything works or everything is faster than it would be if every time you go to outside of mainland China or outside of the Great Firewall to fetch a request or something, right? API design, right? So this is again very important. As I mentioned, you have to make sure that there is region-based routing, right? So if someone is trying to access from mainland China, they access the server or they access the CDN that's also there within mainland China. If a Chinese customer is trying to access services outside mainland China, that might be very slow. And what same way, if someone from Hong Kong is trying to access your services that are hosted in mainland China, then that might be very slow as well. And you want to make sure that there is a failover as well, right? So in case things are very slow, in case the connection breaks down, right, which it often does, then there is like a failover mechanism as well that makes sure that maybe you have cache stuff or you have something that makes sure that any sort of connection breakdown doesn't cause your app to crash. Some front-end tips, right? So fonts, they're kind of like very important. We mostly use Google fonts, right? And they are hosted again by Google, which is not available in mainland China. So this, at least for me, it's very difficult to note as well because for me, different fonts don't look different at all. Avoid blocked domains, right? So some of the domains, again, if you have YouTube embedded video, or if you use something related to Google, right? Like Google Maps embedded, right? Then those things definitely won't work. So you have to kind of like make sure you use any alternates, or you just remove them altogether, right? And async loading, right? So as we mentioned, the since the connection between mainland China and rest of the world is slow, so you need to make sure that you use as much lazy loading and those kind of stuff to make sure that your app loads faster than it should. Uh, Monitoring and analytics, again, right? Google Analytics doesn't work there. So use this is, I think, Alibaba Clouds. Use sensor data or any other self-hosted analytics tool as well, such as Vitomo. And finally, dev workflow. So you need to make sure that once you're building your app, you also test it within mainland China, or at least you simulate the environment by making sure that your app, for example, works if there is a network throttling, right? Or if there's a VPN throttling in place.
Are there VPNs that emulate being in China or?
There are, yes, there are private ones that you can use, right? But they are trying to crack that down as well, right? So yeah, they're kind of like slowly shutting down. That's right.
Is there like a website or a list somewhere of like all of the things that don't work there? Like, so I realize Twitter
Right.
won't work and like all covers.
I am not sure. Yeah, I don't know about that, right? So I think the best thing is you go there and try it out yourself to see if it works. But the downside for that is, even if something works there, it can be blocked. And even if it is working there, it might be unstable or it might be very slow as well, right? So you don't have to rely on third-party providers, or you shouldn't rely on them, especially if they are like the main component of your app, right? So you should probably swap them with an equivalent that's made in mainland China, or that's kind of like works legally in mainland China.
Because even Microsoft does not really support it.
Yes, yes, yes. So same thing, right? So Microsoft Office, it kind of like works there, but it's very slow as well.
Yeah, for in-app monetization,
Mhm.
we used to say Apple's arrangement, which is you sell to the Apple Store. How do you monetize with for app?
Yes, you need to do that, right? You can use Apple Store, right? But you can't use Google Play Store, right? So that's why it's much better if you use something like WeChat Pay for mainland China instead of App Store, right? Because then you'll have one payment system for both Android as well as iOS users.
So you can incorporate WeChat Pay into the app.
Yes, yes. But again, for that, you need to get an ICP commercial license,
Yeah, of
which
course.
means, yeah.
So everyone has to use the WeChat Pay system, the WePay system, or the Alipay, we call it.
So there are two different systems, right? So you can use either, or you can even use both of them. Right? Okay. Finally, to wrap things up, basically key takeaways. The first point, China's internet, it's a bit different, and we know why. They went mobile first into the internet, right? Unlike most of the Western world, which used laptops and desktops to use the internet first. So that's why their internet evolved differently as well. And then on top of that, they also have the Great Firewall, which prevented them to use most of the internet services or the big companies, .com companies like Amazon or Google that came up in early 2000s. Internationally hosted software platform usually don't work in China, right? Due to the interference of the Great Firewall. And even if they do work, they would be pretty slow, or they might work on some days and they might not work on the other days. User experience, infrastructure, and compliance, right? So they are equally as important as language. So if you just think that maybe if I change the language to Chinese, I should be good enough to go to mainland China and have a consumers there. That's pretty wrong. You need to modify a bit of UX, make sure it works more on the mobile phone. It has WeChat login. infrastructure, make sure everything is maybe hosted in China, or at least it has direct connect to the internet outside. And compliance, obviously, right? So if you don't comply with the laws there, they have the right to ban your app or fine you as well. And the fine is usually pretty steep and very harsh, right? Try and build cloud native apps and portable systems. So make sure that you don't rely on clouds like AWS or Microsoft Azure as much as possible. Make sure you use Kubernetes, for example, to deploy services. You manage most of the apps or most of the dependencies yourself, or as many as you can, especially the critical ones like authentication or like monitoring tools, etc. And make sure that they're portable as well. So you can plug them from one cloud and place it to the other cloud in mainland China as well. Finally, compliant, right? So, and by compliant, I just don't mean that you have to be compliant with laws within mainland China, right? So if you're compliant with, let's say, ISO, or if you're compliant with the GDPR laws, if you're compliant with the European laws, right? You're almost 90% compliant with the Chinese laws as well, right? Because these laws, they're literally pretty much same. And the reason why they're there is also the same, right? For data protection and all. So if you're compliant, in general, you would be 90% compliant with the Chinese laws as well. And then the rest of the 10% should be easy for you to cover as well. Finally, self-host wherever possible. So Docker registry, CI/CD, right? So you use GitLab and your own Docker registry. You host your own phones and basically do as much as you can to avoid using managed services. And like, I'm not against managed services, but most of the managed services don't work in China. So you either avoid using them or make sure that there is an equivalence of the managed service in mainland China as well before committing to something. And I think that should wrap it up. And yes.
Can you recommend any platforms to run ads in mainland?
So if it's social media,
what would be approach to advertise your website?
right? So
What do you want?
again, right? So if you want to go to a social media, then it's the Red Note, right? That's kind of like the most popular one. And I think their algorithm is pretty good as well. So you can reach your target audience pretty quickly through that. But if you want to go through influencer route as well, right? So you can kind of like maybe pay few of the already established influencers there, especially the live streamers, right? And go through that one. Finally, you need to have your own presence as well, right? So you need to have your own WeChat account, for example. So even if you have customers in mainland China, you may need to make sure that you have a WeChat account, because if they have any complaint, they're going to reach you through WeChat, right? They're going to try and communicate to you via WeChat, or they're going to provide feedback to you via WeChat. So WeChat is kind of like very important for bi-directional communication. Yes.
So right now, it's the main.
That's the main,
social
yeah.
media.
That's like the Instagram of mainland China.
Is Red Note the little red book?
Little Red Book, yeah, it's the same.
I was going to ask about security, like cyber security. When I lived in China, all of my websites got hacked.
Right.
And then they all got, I lost all of them.
Right.
They're all WordPress though, so
Okay.
I'm probably asking for it.
And I'm assuming this is gonna be like maybe 10 years ago or
No, 2017, 2018.
2017, right? So like, okay.
Yeah.
But it's getting a bit more strict now, right? And all with this MLPS and everything that we talked about, right? It's getting much stricter. Also penalties have gotten a bit harsher, right? So people are a bit more afraid of doing that things. But yeah, WordPress, I guess it can get hacked anyway, right? It doesn't have anything to do, especially with China, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there anything like special security wise that you need to do? Just trying to think, like, I guess if you're accepting payments and you're using like work.
Oh yeah. So let me maybe go back a little bit to MLPS, right? So as I mentioned, right, MLPS, it basically depends on what your business is, right? So there are different levels, level 1 to 4. 1 is the easiest one, right? So if you're just maybe showing off some information, or you aren't collecting a lot of data, right? Then that's for you, right? But let's say if you are maybe if you have a few hundreds of customer and you're storing their personal data, right? You would most likely fall within level 2, right? And in that case, you have to, let's say, make sure that the personal data stays within mainland China, right? So it's either stored in mainland China or at least it has a backup in mainland China, within mainland China, right? So, and then you need to make sure that there is audit and trail as well, right? So in case there's a leakage, people would know exactly where things went wrong, right? So, and then you need to basically it goes more stricter, right, as you go up, right? So if you're making a social media, right? So that would be level 3 or level 4, or if you have millions of customers, or if you're doing, let's say, some military grade stuff, like if you're providing some services to military, right, then the security level goes up. And based on those securities, right, you have different criteria based on that. Yeah. Right. Any more questions? Yeah.
If you don't use cloud and you want to host your own infrastructure in mainland China, like bring your own servers, can you do that, or is there some sort of like extra steps?
Oh, so you're saying like you want to have an on-premise system
Yeah.
within mainland China,
Yeah.
right? That should be possible, right? Because if you're using it on-premise within your own private network, then the government doesn't have to do anything with it, right? So this is only for like public clouds and public networks and public services. Yeah. And a lot of factories and stuff, they basically prefer using private clouds or like on-premise solutions because they don't want to comply with everything that's there.
I don't plan on doing that. I was curious.
Right.
I guess unless there's any other questions, I just have a final question. What sort of clients and sites are you working with? Like what kind of companies and products are trying to work in China? And I know you do a bit of IoT as well.
Right.
How much of that have you touched on as well?
Right. So right now we are still a very young startup, right? We just started in March, and right now we only have 2 clients, and they are pretty much very similar. They're both German, and they are both involved in machine manufacturing. And we want to build an IoT solution for them that works also in mainland China because they have a lot of customers there, and they sell a lot of machines in mainland China, right? But at the same time, we are also trying to help Chinese companies that want to internationalize, right? So we're trying to focus on that. So we are looking at companies literally going to Shenzhen and then trying to find cool companies with cool technologies, right? And that are maybe big in mainland China, but they don't have any market in rest of the world, right? So we're trying to bridge that gap as well. So I think, yeah, businesses going in China, it's kind of like drying up. It's getting smaller and smaller chunk of businesses that are there in mainland China, but a lot of companies in mainland China are there ready to go out and expand internationally. So we're going to tap that market now.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. That's really exciting. I used to. Oh yeah, question.
For example, Duolingo is running on China. Duolingo is running
Yeah.
on China.
Yeah.
How they are reaching out that application from each other? No, they don't use Google App Store or
Right. So if you don't have Google App Store, how did it reach out to Android customers, right?
all of them. For example,
Yeah.
my
So
friend in mainland
yeah.
is using Duolingo, but I don't know.
Yeah. So there are multiple ways that they do it, right? So they have, sorry,
Cannot for each other on Duolingo, but
you cannot check. Yeah. So
cannot find me.
essentially the thing is, right? I don't know Duolingo, right, how their architecture is, but I'm assuming that they have 2 different architectures. One architecture or one infrastructure for mainland China and one for rest of the world, right? So if you're part of the mainland Chinese group, right, you cannot interact with people outside and so on and so forth, right? And how they distribute the app is they have different app stores. So they have Samsung App Store, for example. They have, I think Huawei App Store is the biggest one, right? So they have, but there is no one app store like Google Play Store, right? That kind of like majority of people uses. Maybe I think Huawei is the biggest one and 25% people use it, right? But still, right, there are 10 to 15 smaller ones as well. And the population is kind of like distributed widely between them. So you can't be like, oh, if I use just one app store, I would be able to reach everyone in mainland China, right? Or sometimes you just download the APK, right? And yeah, so you go to duolingo.com and maybe download the APK.
On that topic, sometimes I play PUBG, which is a game owned by Tencent.
Right.
And I'm connected with people from mainland China
Right.
and outside, and it flows very like smoothly.
Right.
How do
Right.
they make that work?
Right. Again, my assumption would be, right, that they use direct connect that we talked about, right? So direct connect is like a private tunnel, right? And it doesn't go through the Great Firewall, right? Which means that you can actually control the bandwidth, you can control the latency and everything within the connection from mainland China and outside of it, right? So my assumption would be they use something like this. And Tencent, it's like, and they provide direct connect to their customers as well. So I'm guessing they're going to use their own infrastructure for that. Yeah.
Right.
If they are reaching from website SDK, then there must be some regulation that must be compliance.
Yes.
Should be
So the compliance is not with the APK, right? So I can kind of like upload any APK as well and maybe create a fake store, right? And make people download it, right? But the compliance is on registered business. So if you have a business, right, that runs there, right, then you need to make sure that your app is compliant by filing for the ICP app license, right? So there is an ICP license for apps as well. You can see over here, right? Mobile apps, they need to have an ICP license as well. And once it's basically just a big form that you need to fill out. You need to mention if you are generating money, how many users you have, and what kind of business you have, and how you kind of like generate revenue and so on and so forth, right? So it's just like registering your business in mainland China, right? But if it's an unregistered business, right, it can work in mainland China, but as soon as they find out, they will just block you.
Do you, I guess, I think I know the answer to this, but how important is Mandarin when doing this sort of stuff?
Is knowing Mandarin, right? I don't know Mandarin at all.
How, you don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
So you have to, so when you're filling out forms and stuff,
Right.
do they have an English version or is it?
No, it's all Chinese. And in order to get this license, you need to have a Chinese partner as well, because they only issue to Chinese national or businesses registered to Chinese nationals, right? So yeah, I cannot do it as Great Wall Connect. We have partners in mainland China, yeah, and they help us do it.
Okay, yeah.
should be an easy one.
5 pages, yeah. Yes.
You have a lot of statistics about how many people like, is it easy for them to go to reach outside of the ring walk? It's like 3D doing
So certain sites, they're completely blocked, right? Like Instagram, right? You cannot use them at all. WhatsApp as well, I guess, right? You cannot use it at all. But there are certain sites, right, that are there, that are hosted outside, but you can reach them through mainland China, right? But the problem there is they are very unreliable. The connection is very unreliable because it has to go through the firewall, right? It slows down like 10 times. So if let's say there is a website that's hosted outside, it can load within 1 second in Hong Kong, right? If you are within mainland China, it might take you 10 seconds to load the same website because the network is routing through the firewall and then reaching the server and then going back, right? So it is reachable, but it would be very unstable and very slow as well.
And if you have a non-CN domain, then
Yeah.
the Great Firewall will just one fine day block you, and you will, I
Yeah, and if it's not registered, then they can block. So right, so you always have that risk. Yeah. And again, right, so if you're running business, you know that if your website is not accessible 10 days out of in a month, right, then that's not a good business, right? Then you won't have a lot of customers. So
Thank you.
yes,
Thank you.
you're
Cool. All right. So that's it. Yeah, yeah.
For the super apps
yes.
services and the APIs and stuff, because there are more than just WeChat,
Mhm.
they did many like delivery apps.
Yeah, yeah.
You have any good suggestion how to discover them? First, how to discover it, second, how to understand how to integrate it with your service.
Right. I think the best way to figure out how to integrate with them is Tencent, right? Tencent made WeChat, and Tencent also has Tencent Cloud. They have a service called Super App as a service, right? In which you can actually make the super app, and then you can also make the mini apps with it, right? So you can kind of like use that platform to figure out how super apps work as well as how the mini apps work, right? For discovery part, I am as lost as you are. So because not a lot of things are there on Google, right? Search engine, they don't have a lot. Mostly using either direct communication like QR code. You go to the place and then they have a QR code you scan, right? Or through social media influencers and so on. So, okay.